Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. I am your temporary host, James Peter. Mr. Peter is taking some well-deserved rest because the doctors advised him to. But don't worry, he's still with us in spirit and has a message for his beloved family. He said, "I love you all very much, each and every one of you. This channel is our home, and now it's up to you to take care of it and help it grow. Your love and support mean the world to me. I know I can never replace Mr. Peter, but I promise to give my very best to keep you entertained and moved. Before we begin, let's take a moment for a beautiful prayer for our family. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this beautiful family gathered here today. Bless them with love, health, and happiness. Surround them with peace, strengthen them in their struggles, and fill their hearts with endless joy. Protect them wherever they go. Guide them toward their dreams, and remind them that they are never alone. May love, kindness, and faith always light their path. Amen. And now, my beautiful family, are you here? Are you satisfied with my accent and narration? Let me know in the comments. Let's begin with love. The Kingston air hung heavy with salt and jasmine as Imani Bailey stood at Norman Manley International Airport, her mother's weathered hands gripping hers with surprising strength. Around them, travelers rushed in currents of excitement and grief, but Imani and Elise remained still, an island in the human tide. The morning sun streamed through the high windows, casting golden light across Elise's face, illuminating every line earned through 57 years of hard work and sacrifice. "Remember who you are," Elise whispered, her Jamaican accent deepening with emotion as she pressed a small silver locket into Imani's palm. The metal felt warm, as if it carried something of her mother's essence within it. "Your beauty is a gift, but your integrity is your power." Imani closed her fingers around the locket, feeling its delicate chains spill between her knuckles. At 22, she stood on the precipice of everything she dreamed about since she was a girl, flipping through fashion magazines that made their way to their small town months after publication. "I won't forget, Mama," she promised, her voice wavering despite her determination to be strong. "I'll make you proud." Elise's eyes, the same deep amber as Imani's, studied her daughter's face as if committing it to memory. "You already have, child, since the day you were born." She straightened the collar of Imani's blouse, a habitual gesture that spoke of a lifetime of caring for her only daughter. "Just don't let the bright lights blind you to what matters." The final boarding call for Flight 1427 to New York echoed through the terminal, startling both women. Around them, other families engaged in similar rituals of goodbye. Mothers blessing children, fathers giving stoic nods that masked their worry, younger siblings clinging to the legs of older ones embarking on journeys to somewhere better, somewhere with more opportunity. "It's time," Imani said softly, adjusting the strap of her carry-on bag. Everything she owned in the world was either in that bag or in the single-checked suitcase already loaded onto the plane. 22 years distilled into luggage light enough for one young woman to carry. Elise nodded, the movement causing a single tear to break free and slide down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, squaring her shoulders. "The Bailey women don't cry when it's time to be brave," she said, echoing a phrase Imani had heard throughout her childhood whenever she faced a challenge. Imani smiled despite the knot in her throat. "Then I better stop this nonsense," she replied, blinking back her own tears as she fastened the locket around her neck. The small silver heart rested against her collarbone, its weight negligible yet somehow anchoring. They embraced one final time, Elise's familiar scent of coconut oil and the faint spice of the ginger tea she drank every morning enveloping Imani. For a moment she was a child again, safe in her mother's arms, the world outside their small house in Montego Bay, nothing but a distant rumble. "God go with you," Elise murmured against her daughter's hair. Then she stepped back, her hands falling away, severing the physical connection between them. Imani shouldered her bag and turned toward the gate, forcing her legs to move when they wanted nothing more than to route to the spot. She presented her passport and boarding pass to the attendant, who barely glanced at them before waving her through. At the threshold between departure lounge and jetway, Imani turned back. Elise stood exactly where she'd left her, a solitary figure in a faded blue dress that had once been Imani's, tailored by her skilled hands to fit her smaller frame. Her mother raised her right hand in blessing, and Imani mirrored the gesture before stepping onto the jetway. The walk to the plane felt eternal. Each step carried her further from everything familiar toward a future built on nothing more substantial than her own ambition and the encouragement of a photographer who had visited the island 6 months earlier for a tourism campaign. He'd spotted Imani waiting tables at the resort where she worked and declared her exactly what New York is looking for right now. With those cheekbones and that height? "Darling, you're wasting yourself here," he'd said, sliding his business card across the table. "I've got contacts. Give me a call when you're ready to make something of yourself." The memory of his words sustained her as she found her seat, stowed her bag, and buckled her seatbelt with hands that trembled slightly. The middle-aged American woman beside her barely acknowledged her presence, immediately returning to her novel. Imani was grateful for the lack of conversation. She needed these moments to compose herself. Through the small oval window, she could see a slice of the terminal, though not the spot where she'd left her mother. Still, she watched that fragment of her homeland until the plane backed away from the gate, severing the last physical connection to Jamaica. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Imani closed her eyes and allowed herself one moment of pure terror. What if the photographer had been lying? What if New York rejected her? What if she failed and had to return home, proving right everyone who told her she was reaching beyond her station? The engines surged as the plane accelerated down the runway, pressing Imani back against her seat. Her eyes flew open as the ground fell away and Kingston began to diminish beneath them. She watched the landscape transform from buildings to a patchwork of urban development, then to the stunning coastline that had been the backdrop of her entire existence. The emerald waters of the Caribbean stretched to the horizon, gradually transforming into the deeper blue of the Atlantic as the plane banked northward. White breakers laced the shore, and for a moment Imani thought she could see the beach near her home, where her father had taught her to swim before a fishing accident took him when she was 7. But that was impossible from this altitude. It was just her mind creating familiar landmarks to cling to. As Jamaica disappeared beneath cotton-white clouds, Imani touched the locket at her throat. Inside was a tiny photo of her parents on their wedding day, both of them so young and full of hope. Her father, with his wide smile and kind eyes, had the same complexion as hers, the rich brown of polished mahogany. Her mother, more reserved in her happiness but radiating quiet strength, had passed down her high cheekbones and graceful neck. "Your beauty comes from generations of proud women," Elise had told her daughter when boys first began to notice her. "But so does your determination. Never forget which matters more." Now, thousands of feet above the ocean separating her past from her future, Imani silently renewed her promise. New York would not change her core, would not make her forget who she was or where she came from. She would succeed on her own terms or not at all. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their estimated arrival time at JFK International Airport. 7 hours to transform from island girl to aspiring model in the world's most competitive fashion market. 7 hours to prepare for the cacophony and pace of New York City, which she had only experienced through movies and television shows. Imani pulled a dog-eared copy of Vogue from her bag. The issue was 3 months old, salvaged from the resort's lobby after guests had finished with it. She'd studied it religiously, not just for the fashions, but for clues about the industry she was entering, the designers whose names she should know, the photographers whose style she should recognize, the models whose careers she hoped to emulate. Her fingers traced the face of Alec Weck on one page, another dark-skinned model who had carved a space for herself in an industry that had historically favored a different aesthetic. If Alec could do it, coming from war-torn Sudan, then surely Imani could make her way from the relative paradise of Jamaica. The plane leveled out and the seatbelt sign dinged off. Around her, passengers began to move about the cabin, retrieving items from overhead bins or making their way to the lavatories. Imani remained seated, opening her magazine to a marked page containing an article about newcomers to the modeling world. As she read about the grueling go-sees, the unpredictable casting calls, the fierce competition, her resolve only strengthened. She had never shied away from hard work. Growing up with a single mother in Jamaica had taught her perseverance from an early age. After her father died, Imani had watched Elise take in sewing to supplement her income as a school administrator, often working until dawn to fulfill orders. She'd seen her mother decline a promising relationship with a kind man because he'd wanted her to give up her independence. A woman must always be able to stand on her own feet, Elise had explained when Imani questioned the decision. Love is beautiful, but security comes from within. Those lessons had shaped Imani into someone who approached challenges with a quiet confidence. Now, as the plane carried her toward a new life, that confidence was her most valuable possession, more precious than the small amount of money saved from her resort job, more enduring than the few fashionable outfits carefully packed in her suitcase. Hours passed. Imani dozed intermittently, waking fully when the meal service began. The airplane food was bland compared to the vibrant flavors of Jamaican cuisine, but she ate every bite, conscious of the need to maintain her strength for what lay ahead. As the plane began its descent into New York, Imani's excitement bubbled up, eclipsing her earlier anxiety. She pressed her face to the window, eager for her first glimpse of the city that featured so prominently in her dreams. The metropolis revealed itself gradually through breaks in the cloud cover, a vast expanse of geometric precision, gray and imposing yet pulsing with an energy that was visible even from the air. Skyscrapers jutted skyward like mineral formations, their glass facades reflecting the late afternoon sun. The scale was overwhelming. Kingston's modest downtown suddenly seemed like a child's toy model in comparison. The landing was smooth, the plane touching down with a series of small bumps before the engine's reversed thrust, pressing passengers forward against their seatbelts. Imani exhaled slowly, realizing she'd been holding her breath. "First time in New York?" the woman beside her asked, finally acknowledging her seatmate as they taxied toward the terminal. Imani nodded. "Yes, first time leaving Jamaica, actually." The woman's expression softened slightly. "Well, it's a hell of a city. Wonderful and terrible all at once." She hesitated, then added, "Be careful out there. New York doesn't suffer fools or the unprepared." "I'll remember that," Imani replied, unsure whether to be grateful for the advice or offended by the implication that she might be either of those things. As she deplaned and followed the crowd toward immigration, Imani felt the first real pangs of culture shock. JFK Airport was a cacophony of announcements in multiple languages, harried travelers rushing in all directions, security personnel watching with alert, suspicious eyes. The air smelled of jet fuel, industrial cleaners, and the collective stress of thousands of people in transit. In the immigration line, Imani clutched her passport and visa documentation, mentally rehearsing her answers to potential questions. The photographer had helped arrange her visa, classifying her as a cultural exchange visitor with permission to accept modeling work. She prayed there would be no issues. Being turned away at this point would be devastating. When her turn came, the immigration officer barely looked at her, mechanically scanning her passport and asking rote questions about the purpose and duration of her stay. Imani answered clearly, her English perfect, though lilted with her Jamaican accent. After what seemed an eternity but was probably less than 2 minutes, he stamped her passport and waved her through. Relief washed over her as she collected her suitcase from the baggage carousel and moved toward the customs checkpoint. This hurdle, too, she cleared without incident, and suddenly she was standing in the arrivals area of JFK International Airport, officially on American soil. The photographer had arranged for a car service to meet her, but as Imani scanned the crowd of drivers holding signs, she didn't see her name. Anxiety fluttered in her stomach as the minutes ticked by with no sign of her arranged transportation. After 20 minutes of increasingly worried waiting, she approached an information desk where a board attendant informed her that if her ride hadn't shown up by now, she should probably find another way into the city. Imani stepped away, calculations running through her head. She had budgeted every dollar carefully, not accounting for unexpected expenses like an emergency taxi ride. But what choice did she have? She couldn't spend the night in the airport. As she debated her options, her dreams of modeling success momentarily dimmed by this first setback. A voice called her name. Turning, she saw a harried-looking young man hurrying toward her, a sign with Bailey hastily scrawled on it, tucked under his arm. Imani Bailey? God, I'm so sorry. Traffic was a nightmare, and then there was an accident on the Van Wyck. He trailed off, seeming to realize that his excuses meant little to someone who had just spent hours traveling and then waiting. I'm Derek, Anton's assistant. He sent me to pick you up. Anton, the photographer who had discovered her. Imani's relief was palpable as she allowed Derek to take her suitcase. It's fine, she said, though it wasn't, not really. But she was too exhausted and overwhelmed to argue. I'm just glad you're here now. As Derek led her to the parking garage, chattering about the apartment they'd arranged for her and the go-sees already scheduled for the coming week, Imani felt her optimism returning. The dream that had carried her across an ocean was still within reach, burning brighter than her fear. Outside, the October air hit her with its unfamiliar chill, so different from Jamaica's perpetual summer. Imani pulled her light jacket closer around her shoulders as they emerged onto the street. The skyline of Manhattan was just visible in the distance, a jagged silhouette against the darkening sky, promising opportunity and challenge in equal measure. Imani took a deep breath of this foreign air, filling her lungs with possibility. I'm ready, she whispered, not to Derek or anyone else, but to the city itself and whatever fate awaited her within its towering embrace. Chapter 2. Hollow Promises. 6 months had passed since Imani's plane touched down in New York. 6 months of reality steadily eroding the glittering dreams that had carried her across the ocean. The glamour she had imagined, runway shows in elegant venues, photographers clamoring to capture her unique beauty, her face gracing magazine covers, had dissolved into something far harsher. Imani stared at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror of her 4th apartment since arriving. This one, a cramped studio in Brooklyn's Bushwick neighborhood, she shared with 2 other aspiring models, Lucia from Brazil and May from Taiwan. The 3 rotated sleeping arrangements, 1 week on the pull-out couch, 1 week on the air mattress, 1 week sharing the single bed. Outside, February winds howled through narrow streets, finding every gap in the building's ancient windows. The radiator clanked and hissed, producing more noise than heat. Imani wrapped her mother's shawl tighter around her shoulders. Jamaica had never prepared her for this bone-deep cold. Her phone buzzed, another email notification, probably another rejection. She'd sent her portfolio to 27 agencies in the past month alone. Most never responded. Those that did sent form letters citing a lack of current openings or suggesting she develop more commercial appeal. One particularly cruel response had simply read, Too ethnic for our current roster. Try urban wear campaigns. Imani's portfolio was a collection of amateur shots taken by Anton, the photographer who'd discovered her in Jamaica. He'd promised connections and opportunities, but after arranging her initial housing, a roach-infested room in Queens that cost most of her savings, he'd largely vanished from her life, occasionally texting to invite her to industry parties where he promptly abandoned her. With a sigh, Imani checked the email. Not a rejection this time, but another casting call forwarded by Lucia. They're looking for exotic beauties for a swimwear shoot, Lucia had written. Paying actual money. Worth a try? Imani added it to her calendar, trying to ignore the knot in her stomach at the word exotic. She'd learned quickly that in the modeling industry, exotic often meant being treated as a curiosity rather than a professional. Still, she couldn't afford to pass up potential paying work. The $3,200 she'd saved from 2 years of resort work had dwindled to barely $400, and her mother's occasional $50 transfers weren't enough to cover even a week's expenses in New York. "You should eat something," Lucia said without looking up from where she sat updating her comp cards. "You're getting too thin, even for this industry." Imani managed a weak smile. "Look who's talking." But she obediently made herself a peanut butter sandwich, realizing as she took the first bite how hungry she actually was. She'd started skipping meals to save money. "Any luck with the Crawford agency?" Lucia asked, referring to Imani's interview the previous week. Imani shook her head. "Got the email this morning. They appreciate my unique look, but don't have space on their roster at this time. Translation, they already have one black model and don't need another." Lucia looked up, her dark eyes sympathetic. "This industry is garbage," she said matter-of-factly. "But we knew that coming in, right? I guess I thought talent would matter more than it does," Imani admitted. Later that day, after 2 disappointing casting calls where she was barely given a glance, Imani received a call from an unknown number. "Is this Imani Bailey?" a man's voice asked. "Yes, this is she," Imani replied. "This is David Mercer from Image International. We met at Anton's party last month. I've been reviewing your portfolio online and I think you have potential." Imani's heart leaped. Image International was a legitimate agency with major clients. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Please call me David. Listen, I'd like to discuss representation, but I prefer to do these things face-to-face. Are you free this evening? Say around 9. I could meet you at the Standard Hotel Bar." A hotel bar at night didn't seem like the most professional setting, but Imani had heard that the modeling industry operated by its own rules. "I could make that work," she said cautiously. "Excellent. Wear something eye-catching." He hung up before she could respond. Imani researched Image International to confirm its legitimacy. The agency did represent several top models, including women of color with successful careers. David Mercer was listed as a talent scout, his photo showing a middle-aged man with carefully styled gray hair. Inside the Standards bar, Imani spotted David at a corner table, already nursing what appeared to be scotch. "Mr. Mercer, David," she said as she approached, "I'm Imani Bailey." He looked up, his eyes taking a slow journey from her face down to her shoes and back again. "Imani?" "Yes, sit down." He gestured to the banquette beside him rather than the chair across the table. Imani took the seat across from him instead. "Thank you for considering me for your agency." David smiled, revealing 2 perfect teeth. "The question is, are you the best?" He signaled a waiter. "What are you drinking?" "Just water, please," Imani replied. She wanted to keep her wits about her. "Nonsense. Bring her a cosmopolitan," David told the waiter. "Now, tell me about yourself. Where are you from with that delicious accent?" "Jamaica. Imani said, uncomfortable with his tone. I've been in New York for 6 months. Jamaica? Excellent. We have a client right now looking for that island vibe for a rum campaign. He showed her an advertisement featuring a dark-skinned model in a bikini lounging on a beach. Something like this. Imani frowned slightly. I was hoping for fashion work. Runway. Editorial. David waved dismissively. Everyone wants runway, but the money's in commercial work, and with your look, exotic campaigns are where you'll shine. He urged her to drink. Loosen up a bit. This is New York, not some island church social. So, about representation, she began. What would be the next steps if Image International were interested? David's smile widened. Well, that depends on how interested I am. His hand moved near her knee. My recommendations carry weight at the agency. The implication hung in the air. Imani set her drink down. And what would make you think I'm special? Why don't we discuss that somewhere more private? David suggested. I've got a room upstairs we could do some private test shots. Imani stood abruptly. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm looking for professional representation, not whatever you're suggesting. David's pleasant facade slipped. Don't be naive, sweetheart. This is how the industry works. You think those girls on our roster got there by just being pretty? Everyone pays their dues. Not me, Imani said firmly, gathering her coat. Thank you for the drink, but I'm not interested. As she turned to leave, David caught her wrist. You're making a mistake. Do you know how many girls would kill for this opportunity? Imani looked pointedly at his hand until he released her. Then you shouldn't have any trouble finding someone else. Outside, the cold air felt cleansing. This wasn't the first such proposition she'd encountered, merely the most blatant. Each casting call seemed to end the same way, men with hungry eyes offering private portfolio shoots that had nothing to do with legitimate modeling. The subway ride back to Brooklyn gave Imani time to reflect. The modeling career she'd imagined was proving to be a mirage. Her savings were almost gone, winter showed no signs of releasing its grip, and the city felt increasingly hostile. By the time she reached the apartment, Imani had made a decision. She would give herself 1 more month to secure legitimate representation or paying work. If nothing materialized by then, she would swallow her pride and return to Jamaica. Later, lying on the uncomfortable pull-out couch, Imani fingered the silver locket her mother had given her. Your integrity is your power, her mother had said. Those words had guided her decisions, but integrity didn't pay rent or put food on the table. As sleep claimed her, Imani wondered how many more rejections, how many more David Mercers she could endure before something had to give. Her dreams of modeling success, once so vivid, were fading like footprints in the snow outside her window, blanketing the city in false purity while hiding the grime beneath. Chapter 3. The Proposition. Imani smoothed down the front of her borrowed dress, a sleek black number that May had scored from a promotional event. It fit her tall frame surprisingly well, though the previous owner had clearly been less endowed in the chest. She'd managed the slight gap with fashion tape and careful posture. You look like money, Lucia declared, circling Imani with a critical eye. Rich men will trip over themselves. I'm not looking for rich men, Imani reminded her. Just industry contacts. Lucia shrugged. At these parties, they're usually the same thing. The invitation had come from Anton, her original discoverer, who'd resurfaced after weeks of silence with a text. Bellamy Media Gala tonight, bringing top industry people. Come if you want to be seen. Included was an address in Tribeca and instructions to arrive after 10 p.m. Remember, you're not there to have fun, May said, applying a final touch of highlighter to Imani's cheekbones. You're there to work. Every conversation is a potential job. Imani nodded, stomach churning with anxiety. After David Mercer's proposition the previous month, she'd grown even warier of industry opportunities. But her self-imposed deadline was approaching. If she didn't make a legitimate connection soon, she'd be booking a one-way ticket back to Jamaica. The venue was a converted warehouse, its industrial exterior belying the opulence within. A red carpet led from the sidewalk to the entrance, where two hulking bouncers checked invitations. Imani showed the text from Anton and held her breath, half expecting to be turned away. "Bailey, you're on the list," the bouncer said after consulting his tablet. He fastened a VIP wristband around her wrist and waved her through. Inside, the space pulsed with music and money. Chandeliers dripped crystal light onto the beautiful people below. Women in designer dresses and men in custom suits mingled, everyone perfectly coiffed and exuding the casual confidence that comes with financial security. Imani immediately felt the weight of eyes assessing her. Her dress, was it last season? Her shoes, definitely not designer. Her hair, natural, not the sleek blowouts favored by many attendees. She scanned the crowd for Anton, finally spotting him near the bar, deep in conversation with a silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored tuxedo. Anton saw her and waved her over, his smile slightly too wide, his eyes slightly too bright. Signs of the cocaine Imani knew fueled many industry gatherings. "Imani, darling, you made it," Anton said, air-kissing both her cheeks. "You remember Marcus Reed?" Imani's heart skipped. Everyone in New York knew Marcus Reed, billionaire media mogul whose empire spanned magazines, television networks, and digital platforms. His company, Reed Media, was responsible for launching countless modeling careers. "We haven't actually met," Imani said, extending her hand. "It's an honor, Mr. Reed." Marcus Reed was in his early 50s but looked younger thanks to what rumors suggested was a combination of clean living and discreet surgical touch-ups. His steel-gray eyes assessed Imani with the practiced gaze of a man who had spent decades looking at beautiful women professionally. "The pleasure is mine," he replied, taking her hand but not shaking it, just holding it for a moment too long. "Anton tells me you're from Jamaica. How are you finding our fair city?" "Colder than I expected," Imani said with a small smile, "but full of opportunities." "Is that so?" Marcus's eyebrow arched slightly. "Have you found many?" Imani hesitated, aware that Anton was watching the exchange with unconcealed interest. The truth, that she was barely surviving, would make her appear desperate. "I'm still building my portfolio," she said diplomatically. "I've been fortunate to meet some interesting people in the industry." "Interesting," Marcus echoed, taking a sip of his drink. "That's one word for it." He turned to Anton. "Give us a moment, would you? I'd like to speak with Ms. Bailey privately." Anton nodded eagerly and melted into the crowd. Marcus guided Imani toward a quieter corner of the room, his hand barely touching the small of her back. Proprietary but not overtly inappropriate. "Anton showed me your test shots," Marcus said, leaning against the wall. "You have a rare quality. The camera doesn't just love you, it reveals you. That's uncommon." "Thank you," Imani said, genuinely flattered. Coming from someone of his stature, this was no small compliment. "But you're struggling," he continued. It wasn't a question. "This city devours beautiful young women with dreams. It's a tale as old as New York itself." Imani stiffened slightly. "I wouldn't say devours. I'm making progress." Marcus smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. "Pride. I respect that. But let's be honest with each other. You're 1 month away from giving up and going home." The accuracy of his assessment startled her. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I've seen it 1,000 times. The timeline is always the same. 6 months of hope, then reality sets in." He finished his drink. "Tell me, what would you do to succeed here? To really succeed, not just survive?" "Work hard, build connections, Develop my portfolio. Imani recited the mantra she'd repeated to herself since arriving. Marcus chuckled, the sound low and almost pitying. Spoken like someone who still believes talent is enough. He set his empty glass on a nearby table. Follow me. I want to show you something. Curiosity overrode caution as Imani followed him through the crowd. People parted before Marcus like water, some nodding respectfully, others trying unsuccessfully to catch his attention. He led her to an elevator at the back of the warehouse, pressing his thumb to a biometric scanner. This building belongs to a subsidiary of mine, he explained as the doors slid open. I keep a private office here for when downtown meetings run late. Imani hesitated at the threshold of the elevator. I should probably get back to the party. To what end? Marcus asked bluntly. To circulate aimlessly, hoping someone important might notice you. I'm offering you 10 minutes of undivided attention from the most connected man in the room. That's worth more than the entire night down there. Put that way, it seemed foolish to refuse. Imani stepped into the elevator, maintaining a careful distance as they ascended to the top floor. Marcus's private office occupied the entire penthouse level. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panorama of Manhattan, the city lights glittering like fallen stars against the night sky. Central Park was visible to the north, a dark rectangle amid the urban glow. Beautiful, isn't it? Marcus said, moving to a bar cart. Drink? No, thank you. I prefer to keep a clear head. He nodded approvingly. Smart. He poured himself a small measure of amber liquid, then gestured toward a seating area overlooking the park. Please, sit. The furniture was sleek, minimalist and undoubtedly expensive. Imani perched on the edge of a leather armchair, increasingly aware that she was alone with an extraordinarily powerful man in a space few people ever saw. Marcus took the seat opposite her, studying her face in silence for a moment. Tell me about your childhood in Jamaica, he said suddenly. What shaped you? The question caught her off guard. My mother, mostly. She raised me alone after my father died when I was 7. She's a school administrator, but she took in sewing to make extra money. She taught me the value of hard work and dignity. Dignity, Marcus repeated, as if testing the word's weight. A rare commodity these days. He leaned forward. Tell me, Imani, what do you really want? Beyond modeling, what's the ultimate goal? Imani considered carefully before answering. Security. The ability to take care of my mother the way she took care of me. And she hesitated, then decided on honesty. Recognition. Not fame exactly, but acknowledgement of my worth. Marcus nodded slowly. Refreshingly straightforward. Most would claim some nonsense about art or self-expression. He set his drink down. I have a proposition for you, but before I share it, I need you to understand something. I'm not a man who wastes time with indirection. I see what I want, and I pursue it efficiently. Imani felt a prickle of unease. What kind of proposition? One that would solve all your financial concerns permanently. One that would give you the security you seek and, yes, even the recognition. Though perhaps not in the way you imagined. He paused. I need an heir. Imani blinked, certain she had misheard. I'm sorry. An heir, Marcus repeated calmly. A child. My companies, my holdings, they're worth billions. I've built a legacy that deserves continuation, but at 53, I find myself without anyone to leave it to. I don't understand what this has to do with me, Imani said carefully, though a sinking feeling in her stomach suggested she understood all too well. Marcus leaned back, his expression matter of fact. I'm proposing a transaction. No strings attached. One night, one child, and I'll make sure you never worry about money again. You'd have no obligation to me or the child, though you could remain in its life if you wished. Either way, you'd be generously compensated. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Imani gripped the arms of her chair, steadying herself. "You're asking me to be a surrogate?" "In a manner of speaking, though not in the clinical sense. I prefer a more natural approach." His gaze remained even, businesslike. "You're healthy, intelligent, and strikingly beautiful. More importantly, you possess character, that dignity you mentioned. These are qualities I'd like to see in my successor." Imani stood up abruptly. "Mr. Reed, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I came here looking for modeling opportunities, not this." Marcus didn't rise. "Is it really so different? The modeling industry wants to commodify your beauty for public consumption. I'm offering to value it privately and at a much higher price." He named a figure that made Imani's breath catch. "That would be the immediate payment. Additionally, there would be a monthly stipend for life, regardless of whether you choose to be involved with the child." "I'm not a broodmare," Imani said, her voice shaking slightly with anger. "My body isn't for sale." "Everything has a price," Marcus replied, unmoved by her indignation. "The only question is whether the offer meets your threshold." He stood finally, moving to his desk and retrieving a business card. "I don't expect an answer tonight. Take this. When you're ready to discuss terms, call the private number on the back." Imani took the card automatically, her mind reeling. "I should go." "Of course. Take the elevator down. It will return you to the main floor." Marcus made no move to stop her, no attempt to persuade further. "Think of it this way, Imani. I'm offering you a choice that most in your position never get. The power to solve all your problems with one decision." "That's not power," Imani said, moving toward the elevator. "That's desperation." "Call it what you will. The outcome remains the same." He pressed the button, summoning the elevator. "You know where to find me when you change your mind." "If," Imani corrected, stepping into the elevator. "If I change my mind?" Marcus smiled, the expression somehow both confident and empty. "Experience has taught me it's usually a matter of when, not if. Good night, Miss Bailey." The elevator doors closed on his impassive face, and Imani sagged against the wall, her legs suddenly weak. The business card in her hand seemed to burn through her skin. The number he'd offered was more money than she'd ever imagined possessing, enough to send home to her mother, enough to live comfortably in New York, enough to never worry about predatory photographers or casting directors again. But the cost? The elevator returned her to the party, which continued unabated, the beautiful people drinking and laughing, unaware of the transaction that had just been proposed several floors above them. Imani moved through the crowd in a daze, barely registering Anton's attempt to introduce her to a fashion editor, excusing herself as quickly as politeness allowed. Outside, the March air was still cold enough to cut through her thin dress, but she welcomed it, letting the chill clear her head as she walked several blocks before hailing a taxi she couldn't really afford. Back at the apartment, Lucia and May were still awake, eager for details about the party and any connections she'd made. Imani gave them censored highlights, mentioning meeting Marcus Reed, but omitting his proposition. Some things were too bizarre, too demeaning to share, even with friends. Later, alone in the bathroom, Imani stared at her reflection, searching her face as if it might contain answers to questions she never thought she'd have to consider. The silver locket from her mother caught the harsh bathroom light, a reminder of everything she'd been taught about dignity and self-respect. Her phone buzzed with a text from her Aunt Vera. "Call when you can. Your mother's been having chest pains again." Imani's stomach tightened with worry. Elise had mentioned minor heart problems in their last conversation, downplaying them as nothing serious. But her mother always minimized her own suffering. She tore Marcus's business card in half, then in quarters, dropping the pieces into the toilet and flushing them away. She would find another way. There had to be another way. But as she climbed onto the pull-out couch, her turn again in their rotation, the number he'd offered echoed in her mind, a siren song of security in a city that had offered her nothing but struggle. She fell into uneasy sleep, dreams filled with elevators that only went up, never down, and a child with her face and Marcus Reed's steel-gray eyes staring accusingly from a mansion window as she walked away, pockets heavy with blood money. She awoke to her phone ringing, her aunt's number from Jamaica. Calls from home at this hour never brought good news. "Auntie Vera," she answered, her voice thick with sleep and foreboding. "Imani, thank God. It's your mother." Her aunt's voice cracked with emotion. "She's had a heart attack." Chapter 4. Desperate Measures. The call came at 3 a.m. Imani clutched her phone, her Aunt Vera's voice breaking as she delivered the news that shattered her world. "Imani, it's your mother." The connection crackled, the distance between New York and Jamaica seeming to stretch with each word. "She collapsed at school yesterday. A massive heart attack." Imani's grip tightened on the phone, her knuckles whitening. "How bad is it? Can I speak to her?" "She's in intensive care. The doctors..." Vera's voice cracked. "They say she needs surgery immediately. Her heart valve is severely damaged." "I'll book a flight home," Imani said, already mentally calculating the cost, knowing she couldn't afford it but determined to find a way. "There's more," Vera continued, her voice dropping. "The hospital needs payment up front. $50,000, Imani. The insurance won't cover it. Without the surgery, the doctor says." She couldn't finish. A different voice came on the line, male, clinical, detached. "Ms. Bailey, this is Dr. Ramsey. I need to be direct. Your mother's condition is critical. Without surgery in the next few days, she won't make it through the week. The damage is too severe." Imani's legs gave way. She slid down the wall to the floor, the phone slipping from her fingers as the doctor's words echoed in her mind. Lucia found her there an hour later, still frozen in shock, and helped her back to the couch. Morning brought desperate calculations. Her bank balance, $78.32. Her mother's savings, depleted from helping Imani with her initial plane ticket and settling in expenses. Loans, impossible with her non-existent credit history and irregular income. "Could you ask relatives?" Lucia suggested gently, setting a cup of tea beside Imani. "My mother is my only close family. My Aunt Vera is a teacher. She can't access that kind of money." Imani stared at the tea, watching the steam rise and dissipate. "My father had no insurance when he died, and my mother spent years paying off those medical bills. There's nothing left." The next days blurred together as Imani pursued every legitimate avenue she could think of. She started a crowdfunding campaign that raised $2,300. Nowhere near enough. She approached the modeling agencies that had shown interest, asking for advances against future work. Most didn't return her calls. Those that did laughed outright. 3 banks rejected her loan applications due to lack of collateral and stable income. She even approached Anton, who promised to ask around but never got back to her. Imani pawned her few valuable possessions, including her mother's silver locket, gaining another $340. Still not enough. Not nearly enough. At night, she stared at the ceiling, her aunt's daily updates growing more dire. Her mother was weakening. Time was running out. Lucia and May pooled their savings, contributing nearly $1,500, a fortune for them, but barely a dent in what was needed. Imani wept with gratitude, but knew it wasn't a solution. 1 week after the initial call, Imani found herself standing outside an imposing skyscraper in Midtown, Marcus Reed's private number newly entered in her phone. She dug through the trash to find the torn pieces of his business card, taping them together with shaking hands. The receptionist at Reed Media looked skeptical when Imani requested to see Marcus. but one call to his private office changed her expression to surprise. "Mr. Reed will see you immediately. Penthouse floor." In the elevator, Imani's reflection stared back at her, hollow-eyed, mouth set in grim determination. When the doors opened, Marcus stood waiting, as if he'd been expecting her. "You've reconsidered," he said. "Not a question. My mother had a heart attack." Imani's voice was steady despite her turmoil. "She needs surgery. $50,000. Marcus nodded, gesturing for her to follow him into his office. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Manhattan spread below them, oblivious to her personal tragedy. "And so you've come to accept my offer," he said, seating himself behind an enormous desk of polished mahogany. "Tonight, I'll be yours, and I'll give you a baby," Imani said, trembling but resolute. "But you must swear my mother can never find out. She raised me to have dignity." Something flickered in Marcus's gray eyes. Respect, perhaps, or just satisfaction at a deal closing favorably. "Sit," he instructed, pulling out a document already prepared. "These are my terms. Read carefully before signing." The contract was comprehensive. In exchange for conceiving his child, Imani would receive the $50,000 immediately, followed by a monthly allowance of $10,000 throughout the pregnancy. After birth, a trust would be established for her, generating substantial income for life. The child would be Marcus's legally, but Imani could maintain contact at his discretion. Additionally, once the child was born, he would use his connections to launch her modeling career properly. "You've had this ready," Imani observed, turning pages slowly. "I told you I saw what I wanted," Marcus replied. "I don't leave such matters to chance." With shaking hands, Imani signed each page, feeling as if she were signing away more than just legal rights. She was signing away her mother's moral vision of her daughter. Marcus made a call, and within minutes, his assistant entered with a tablet. "The transfer is ready, sir." "Show Ms. Bailey," Marcus instructed. Imani provided her aunt's banking details, watched as $50,000 moved across the world at the touch of a button. The assistant departed, leaving them alone. Marcus rose, approaching her slowly. "Shall we consummate our agreement now, or would you prefer dinner first?" "Now," Imani said, her voice barely audible. "I want this over with." As Marcus led her toward a door at the back of his office, Imani closed her eyes briefly, picturing her mother's face, telling herself this sacrifice was worth it. For Elise's life, she would endure anything. The money transferred instantly to Jamaica. Elise's surgery was scheduled immediately. It was successful, but when Imani finally gathered the courage to call, her mother's voice was weak, not just from surgery. "I know about the money, Imani. Vera couldn't lie to me about where it came from." A long pause filled the line. "I raised you better than to sell yourself." The line went dead before Imani could explain, defend, or beg forgiveness. 2 weeks later, staring at a positive pregnancy test in her bathroom, Imani felt the full weight of her choice. She was carrying Marcus Reed's child, and there was no turning back. Chapter 5. The Agreement. "Tonight, I'll be yours and I'll give you a baby, but you must swear my mother can never find out." Imani stood in Marcus's doorway, trembling but resolute. The words tasted bitter on her tongue, each syllable a betrayal of everything her mother had taught her about dignity and self-respect. But Elise's life hung in the balance, and Imani had exhausted every other option. Marcus's penthouse overlooked Central Park, the late evening light casting long shadows across its immaculately designed interior. Modern art worth millions adorned the walls, and the furniture, all clean lines and muted colors, spoke of wealth that prioritized taste over ostentation. "I admire your directness," Marcus said, gesturing for her to enter. His tone was businesslike, as if they were discussing a corporate merger rather than the creation of a human life. "I've prepared the necessary paperwork. Imani stepped inside, clutching her purse like a shield. The marble floors gleamed beneath her feet, and she was acutely aware of her worn shoes against their polished perfection. "I have conditions," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Marcus raised an eyebrow, moving toward his desk. "By all means. After the money transfers and my mother's surgery is complete, I'll fulfill my part of the bargain. Not before." Imani paused, gathering courage. "And I want something in writing about your promises, the monthly support, the career help, everything." A faint smile crossed Marcus's face. "I was already planning to provide that. I don't enter into arrangements of this magnitude without proper documentation." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Bring in the contracts," he instructed someone on the other end. Minutes later, a severe-looking woman in a tailored suit entered carrying a leather portfolio. She placed it on the desk without acknowledging Imani's presence, then departed without a word. "My lawyer," Marcus explained, opening the portfolio. "She's drawn up the terms we discussed previously, with additional clauses for mutual protection." Imani approached the desk cautiously. The document before her was substantial, at least 20 pages of dense legal text. "I should have a lawyer review this," she said, though they both knew she couldn't afford one. "By all means," Marcus replied, sliding the contract toward her. "Take it home. Seek counsel if you wish. But remember, the clock is ticking for your mother." The reminder was unnecessary and cruel. Imani took the contract, flipping through pages filled with terms like biological material, parental rights, and confidentiality clause. The language was clinical, stripping away any humanity from what they were agreeing to do. "I'll read it now," she said, taking a seat across from him. Marcus nodded, leaning back in his chair. "Take your time. Would you like something to drink? Water? Wine?" "Water," Imani replied absently, already immersed in the document. The contract was comprehensive, addressing scenarios Imani hadn't even considered. In exchange for conceiving and carrying Marcus's child, she would receive 1. An immediate payment of $50,000 for her mother's medical expenses. 2. A monthly allowance of $10,000 throughout the pregnancy. 3. Medical care with the city's top obstetric specialists. 4. Accommodations in a property owned by Marcus for the duration of the pregnancy. 5. After the child's birth, a trust fund generating substantial lifetime income. 6. Professional connections to launch her modeling career once the child was delivered. In return, Marcus would gain 1. Full legal custody and parental rights to the child. 2. Imani's complete confidentiality regarding the arrangement. 3. The right to determine Imani's level of involvement in the child's life. 4. Control over public narrative about the child's parentage. There were additional clauses about health requirements, lifestyle restrictions during pregnancy, and even specifics about the birth plan. Marcus had thought of everything, revealing a man accustomed to controlling every aspect of his domain. Imani looked up from the document, finding Marcus watching her with those steel-gray eyes. "This is very thorough," she said carefully. "I don't believe in ambiguity," he replied. "Clear expectations prevent future disputes." She returned to the contract, focusing on the sections regarding her future relationship with the child. The language left room for her continued presence in the child's life, but gave Marcus final authority on all matters. The child would not learn of the arrangement until Marcus deemed appropriate, if ever. Her stomach twisted at the thought of bearing a child she might be prevented from knowing. But what choice did she have? Her mother's life depended on her signing these papers. "I need you to understand something," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "This isn't merely a business transaction for me. I'm 53 years old. I've built an empire that should outlast me, but I have no one to leave it to. No one who shares my blood, my vision." His voice remained even, but something in his expression suggested genuine emotion beneath the controlled surface. "This child will be my legacy." "And what will the child be to me?" Imani asked quietly. Marcus considered her question. "Whatever you wish, within the parameters we establish. Some women in your position choose to distance themselves emotionally. Others maintain a relationship as a special family friend or distant relative." He paused. "The child will know you, if that's your concern." Imani nodded, turning to the final pages. The signature lines awaited at the end, one for her, one for Marcus, and spaces for notary verification. "Before I sign," she said, "I need to know why me. There must be thousands of women who would agree to this arrangement. Models, actresses, women already established in your circles. Why choose someone who is ready to return to Jamaica in defeat?" Marcus's expression softened slightly. "Those women you mention, they're known quantities. Their ambitions, their histories, their genetic backgrounds are all documented. But you," he studied her face, "you're unformed clay. You arrived in this city with nothing but determination and integrity. When I first saw you at that party, I recognized something rare: beauty without calculation, strength without entitlement." "So I'm an experiment?" Imani asked, unable to hide the edge in her voice. "You're an unknown variable in a carefully designed equation," Marcus corrected. "And that makes you infinitely more interesting than the known quantities." The answer was honest, if not particularly comforting. Imani turned back to the contract, pen hovering over the signature line. With each passing second, her mother's chances diminished. "If I sign this, I need the money transferred immediately," she said. "My mother can't wait." "Of course," Marcus reached for his phone. "I'll have my banker standing by." With shaking hands, she signed her name on each required page, feeling as if she were signing away pieces of herself with every stroke of the pen. Marcus signed after her, his signature bold and practiced. "It's done," he said, pressing a button on his phone. "Jennifer, please come in to notarize the documents." The severe woman returned, notarizing their signatures without comment or curiosity. When she left, Marcus turned to his computer, typing rapidly. "I need your aunt's banking information," he said. Imani provided the details, watching as Marcus completed the transfer. $50,000 moved across the world at the touch of a button, a life-changing sum for her family, a rounding error in Marcus's accounts. "It's done," he said, turning the screen so she could see the confirmation. "The funds should be available immediately." Relief swept through Imani, momentarily overshadowing the gravity of what she just agreed to. Her mother would get the surgery. She would live. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words inadequate for the complex emotions churning within her. Marcus nodded, standing from his desk. "Now, shall we have dinner? I've had my chef prepare something. We should get to know each other better, considering what we're about to create together." The surreal nature of the situation struck Imani anew. She was to have dinner with this man, make conversation, and then conceive a child with him, all in the span of a single evening. Her body felt disconnected from her mind, moving on autopilot as she followed him to an elegantly set dining table overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline. Throughout the meal, exquisitely prepared food that Imani barely tasted, Marcus spoke of his business empire, his vision for the future, and occasionally his expectations for their child. He asked about her childhood in Jamaica, her relationship with her mother, her health history. The conversation was cordial, almost pleasant, yet underlaid with the inescapable awareness of what would follow. When dinner concluded, Marcus led her to another part of the penthouse. The bedroom was spacious and tastefully decorated, dominated by a massive bed with crisp white linens. "I'll give you privacy to prepare," he said, gesturing to an adjoining bathroom. "Take whatever time you need." Alone in the bathroom, Imani stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her seemed like a stranger, someone capable of choices she never imagined making. She thought of her mother, pictured her in a hospital bed awaiting surgery that would now happen because of this bargain. "Your integrity is your power," her mother had always said, but what was integrity worth against a life? What good was moral high ground if it meant letting someone you love die? Imani splashed cold water on her face, steadying herself. This was a transaction, nothing more. One night, and then she could begin rebuilding her life with the resources Marcus had promised. Perhaps in time she could even make her mother understand and forgive. When she emerged, Marcus was waiting, now in a silk robe. "Are you ready?" he asked. Imani nodded silently, unable to speak the lie that would have been yes. The act itself was mercifully brief and clinical, not cruel but devoid of any pretense of emotion or connection. Marcus treated her body with the same efficient attention he likely gave to business acquisitions. When it was over, he offered her the guest room to spend the night. "No," Imani said, already gathering her clothes. "I'd prefer to go home." Marcus didn't argue. He arranged for his driver to take her back to Brooklyn, and by midnight, Imani was in her own bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling irrevocably changed in ways she couldn't yet articulate. The next morning, Vera called with news that the hospital had received the money and scheduled Elise's surgery for that afternoon. The procedure was successful, and for one blissful week, Imani allowed herself to believe the price had been worth it. Then came the call that shattered that fragile peace. "I know about the money, Imani," her mother said, her voice weak from surgery but strong with disappointment. "Vera couldn't keep lying to me about where it came from." "Mama, I can explain." "No explanation needed." The hospital administrator mentioned the transfer came from Reed Media Holdings. A heavy pause filled the line. "I raised you better than to sell yourself." "It wasn't like that," Imani protested, though it was exactly like that. "Do not contact me again until you found your way back to the woman I raised," Elise said, her voice breaking. The line went dead. Imani tried calling back repeatedly, but her mother wouldn't answer. Vera reported that Elise was recovering physically, but refused to discuss her daughter. 2 weeks later, staring at a positive pregnancy test in her bathroom, Imani felt the full weight of her choice settle upon her. The 2 pink lines confirmed what her body had already begun to tell her. She was carrying Marcus Reed's child, and there was no turning back. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number he'd given her for pregnancy-related matters. "It's positive," she said when he answered. "I'm pregnant." "Excellent," Marcus replied, his tone satisfied. "My assistant will contact you tomorrow to arrange your move to the new accommodations and schedule your first prenatal appointment." The call ended, and Imani sank to the bathroom floor, the pregnancy test still in her hand. Outside her window, spring had come to Brooklyn, trees budding with new life, even as her own life veered into uncharted territory. She placed her hand on her still flat stomach, trying to comprehend that within her grew a child conceived not in love or even desire, but in desperate necessity. A child who would be born into privilege, but whose very existence was founded on a contract. A child who might never know the truth of its creation. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though to whom? Her mother, the growing child, or her former self? She couldn't say. Chapter 6. Aftermath. The money transferred instantly to Jamaica. Within hours, Elise was prepped for surgery, a complex valve repair that required 6 hours of delicate work by Kingston's most experienced cardiac surgeon. "She's stable," Aunt Vera reported the following day. "The doctor says it was a close call. Another day might have been too late." Relief washed over Imani, followed immediately by the crushing weight of her mother's potential reaction. For a week, she postponed calling directly, relying on Vera's updates. Elise moved from ICU to regular room, began physical therapy, regained her strength gradually. When Imani finally gathered her courage and called, the silence on the line after her explanation cut deeper than any words could have. "I raised you better than to sell yourself," Elise finally said, her voice weak yet resolute. "I would rather have died with dignity than live knowing what you've done." The line went dead before Imani could respond. Subsequent calls went unanswered. Letters returned unopened. The woman who had shaped Imani's moral compass now refused to acknowledge her existence, a pain that overshadowed even the grinding nausea that began in her 5th week of pregnancy. Marcus moved quickly once the pregnancy was confirmed. Within 3 days, Imani found herself relocated to a sleek Upper East Side apartment, spacious, impeccably decorated, and utterly soulless. The doorman greeted her by name, trained to anticipate her needs while subtly monitoring her movements. For security purposes, Marcus explained during his twice-weekly visits, which followed a sterile routine. He would inquire about her health, review doctors' reports, and occasionally take business calls while in her presence. Their conversations remained formal, as if the child growing inside her was merely another investment in his diversified portfolio. "I've arranged for Dr. Winters to oversee your care," he informed her during her 7th week. "She's handled pregnancies for 3 European royals and numerous high-profile clients. Only the best for my heir." The promised monthly allowance of $10,000 appeared like clockwork in her new bank account. Imani sent $3,000 to her Aunt Vera each month, hoping the money would eventually reach her mother. Vera's updates grew sparse. "She's recovering physically, still won't discuss you. The money helps with her medications, though she doesn't know where it comes from." By the 8th week of pregnancy, morning sickness had transformed into all-day affliction. Imani lost 7 pounds in 10 days, alarming even the usually unflappable Dr. Winters. "Hyperemesis gravidarum," the doctor diagnosed. "Severe pregnancy sickness. We'll need to adjust your care plan." An IV for hydration became a weekly ritual. Anti-nausea medications offered minimal relief. Marcus appeared concerned only about potential impact on the baby, arranging for a private nurse to monitor Imani's condition daily. "Is this normal?" he demanded of Dr. Winters during an appointment Imani was too weak to attend alone. "Will this affect fetal development?" "The fetus is well protected," Dr. Winters assured him. "Ms. Bailey is bearing the brunt of the physiological stress." Even in her misery, Imani noted how they discussed her body as if she weren't present, a vessel whose comfort was secondary to its precious cargo. By the end of her 1st trimester, the violent sickness began to subside. Imani regained strength gradually, venturing out for short walks that felt like freedom after weeks of being bedridden. During this period of physical recovery, she tried repeatedly to contact her mother. Each attempt met with the same unyielding silence. The final time, 16 weeks into her pregnancy, Elise picked up only to say, "When you've found your dignity again, then we'll talk," before disconnecting. That night, Imani dreamed of Jamaica, the warm breeze, the scent of her mother's kitchen, the sound of waves against the shore. She woke with tears on her face and a hollowness that the baby's first fluttering movements, felt for the first time, couldn't fill. "That's the quickening," Dr. Winters explained at her next appointment, noting it in Imani's chart. "Right on schedule at 17 weeks. The fetus is developing normally, despite the difficult 1st trimester." Marcus received this news with evident satisfaction. "Excellent. I'd like to discuss scheduling and amniocentesis to confirm genetic integrity." "That carries a small risk of miscarriage," Dr. Winters cautioned. "Is it standard procedure?" Marcus pressed. "Not unless there are specific concerns." Then we'll forego it, Marcus decided, surprising Imani with this rare prioritization of the pregnancy's safety over his need for control and information. As her second trimester progressed, Imani's body blossomed. The severe sickness faded, replaced by an energy that had nowhere to go. The baby's movements grew stronger, unmistakable reminders of the new life developing within her, a life conceived in transaction but growing in complexity beyond any contractual terms. At night, alone in her luxurious prison, Imani would place her hands on her gradually swelling abdomen, trying to connect with the child beyond the circumstances of its creation. Sometimes she spoke to the baby in whispers, telling stories of Jamaica, of her childhood, of the grandmother who didn't yet know she would love this child regardless of how it came to be. "Your grandmother is the strongest woman I know," she would tell her unborn child. "She'll forgive us both eventually, and when she does, you'll know what real love looks like." Lucia and May visited once early in the second trimester. Their wide eyes took in the luxury around them. Their conversation strained as they tried to reconcile this new reality with the struggling model they had known. "So your benefactor is setting you up for motherhood instead of magazine covers?" Lucia had asked when Imani finally revealed her pregnancy. "The modeling connections will come after," Imani assured her, repeating Marcus's promise. "He has contacts throughout the industry. Once the baby is born, he'll make the introductions." "And the baby?" May asked delicately. "Will you be raising it here?" The question hung in the air, highlighting the fundamental ambiguity of Imani's position. "We're still working out those details," she'd answered, unable to admit the truth, that according to their contract, her role in the child's life would be determined entirely by Marcus. After that visit, Marcus politely suggested limiting outside interactions to reduce stress. The real message was clear. Her friends didn't fit into the narrative he was constructing. By the 24th week, a routine ultrasound revealed what Marcus had somehow seemed certain of all along. The baby was a boy. Imani watched the monitor in wonder as the technician pointed out features: a strong spine, healthy heart, perfect fingers and toes. "My son," Marcus said, momentarily dropping his businesslike demeanor as he stared at the screen. For the first time, Imani glimpsed something beyond ambition in his interest, perhaps the beginning of genuine paternal feeling. The moment passed quickly. By the time they left the medical building, Marcus was already on his phone, instructing his assistant to begin ordering furniture for the nursery he was designing in his own penthouse. That evening, alone again in her apartment, Imani felt the baby kick particularly hard, as if protesting his father's presumptions. "Don't worry," she whispered, rubbing the spot where a tiny foot or hand had pushed against her. "I won't let anyone decide your future without a fight, not even your father. Especially not your father." 24 weeks into her pregnancy, Imani had fulfilled nearly half of her contractual obligation to Marcus. But as her body changed and the baby's presence became increasingly real, a new determination took root alongside her growing child. This arrangement may have begun as a transaction, but it would not end as one. For her son's sake and for her own, she would reclaim the dignity her mother had taught her was her true power. Chapter 7. Gilded Cage. As Imani enters her third trimester, Marcus's controlling behavior intensifies. While providing every material comfort, he treats her increasingly as a vessel for his heir, rather than a person with her own identity and needs. The Upper East Side apartment continued to serve as Imani's gilded cage as her pregnancy progressed into the third trimester. While the severe sickness of her first trimester was now a memory, new challenges emerged. Her body grew increasingly uncomfortable, sleep became elusive, and the baby's movements, once a source of wonder, now sometimes left her breathless as he pushed against her ribs and internal organs. By her 28th week, her body had fully embraced the pregnancy. Marcus's controlling tendencies evolved with her changing condition. He replaced her phone with a more secure model that she later discovered had tracking software installed. Her internet activity was monitored, evident when he questioned her about researching postpartum modeling careers. He even arranged for the laundry service to report if they found shopping bags from stores he hadn't approved for maternity wear. "I understand you visited a boutique on Madison Avenue yesterday," he remarked during one of his twice-weekly visits. "Dr. Winters recommends limited exertion. The car service is available anytime you need something." "I needed air," Imani replied, her hand resting on her rounded abdomen. "And to be around normal people just for an hour?" Marcus's expression tightened. "You're carrying precious cargo. My son deserves every precaution." "We don't know it's a boy," Imani reminded him, though genetic testing had been completed weeks ago. Marcus had insisted on knowing the results privately first. "I have a strong feeling," he replied with a cryptic smile. The apartment came with a personal chef who prepared nutritionally optimized meals, a housekeeper who maintained immaculate surroundings, and a personal assistant who managed Imani's schedule of doctor appointments and prenatal classes. What it didn't come with was freedom. Lucia and May visited once, early in the arrangement. Their wide eyes took in the luxury around them, their conversations strained as they tried to reconcile this new reality with the struggling model they had known. "So your benefactor is setting you up for motherhood instead of magazine covers?" Lucia had asked when Imani finally revealed her pregnancy. "The modeling connections will come after," Imani assured her, repeating Marcus's promise. "He has contacts throughout the industry. Once the baby is born, he'll make the introductions." "And the baby?" May asked delicately. "Will you be raising it here?" The question hung in the air, highlighting the fundamental ambiguity of Imani's position. "We're still working out those details," she'd answered, unable to admit the truth, that according to their contract, her role in the child's life would be determined entirely by Marcus. After that visit, Marcus politely suggested limiting outside interactions to reduce stress. The real message was clear. Her friends didn't fit into the narrative he was constructing. As her 6th month began, Imani's loneliness grew alongside her belly. She tried again to contact her mother, but Elise remained resolute in her silence. The monthly transfers to her aunt continued, accompanied by letters that went unanswered. On a rare evening when Marcus stayed for dinner, Imani broached the subject of her modeling career. "I'd like to start making connections now," she said carefully. "Perhaps meet with some agencies, discuss post-pregnancy opportunities." Marcus cut his food with precise movements. "Let's focus on a healthy delivery first. Plenty of time for career discussions afterward." "You promised," Imani reminded him. "It was part of our agreement." "And I'll honor that agreement," he replied smoothly. "But first things first. After I have my son, we'll discuss your hobby." The word sliced through her. "Hobby? Modeling isn't a hobby. It's my profession, my dream." Marcus's expression remained placid. "Dreams change when you become a parent. You'll see." His assumption that she would naturally subordinate her ambitions to motherhood, despite their contract explicitly stating otherwise, revealed the true nature of their arrangement. The modeling connections had been a carrot, a sweetener to secure her agreement. Whether he would follow through remained increasingly doubtful. As the weeks passed, Marcus's controlling tendencies intensified. He insisted on attending every doctor's appointment, questioning Dr. Winters in detail while often speaking about Imani in the third person, as if she weren't present. Is she getting enough protein? Her sleep patterns seem irregular. Should we consider bed rest as a precaution? Dr. Winters, to her credit, would redirect these questions to Imani, maintaining at least a veneer of patient autonomy. But the message was clear. Imani's body had become a vessel, her personhood secondary to her function. The promised monthly allowance continued to appear in her account, but Imani found little joy in the financial security it provided. What good was money without freedom? Without purpose? Without the people she loved? In her 7th month, feeling the baby's increasingly vigorous movements, Imani made a decision. If Marcus wouldn't facilitate her modeling connections, she would establish them herself. Using her laptop, she researched legitimate agencies, drafted professional emails, and attached the few decent photos she had from before her pregnancy. Within days, 2 agencies responded with interest, requesting meetings after her delivery. The small victory gave her a sense of agency she hadn't felt since signing Marcus's contract. She was more than an incubator. She was still Imani Bailey, the girl from Jamaica with dreams that extended beyond biological function. When the baby, a boy, as Marcus had somehow known, arrived, kicking and screaming his way into the world after 14 hours of labor, Imani felt a love she hadn't anticipated. Leo, she named him in her heart, though Marcus had already designated him Marcus Reed Jr. on the birth certificate. 3 months later, at a party Marcus insists she attend, he drunkenly introduces her to business associates as "my son's convenient vessel." When they return home, his cruel words escalate. "You're nothing but another gold digger. I've given you more than you deserve." Something inside Imani snaps. "I wasn't a prostitute when you met me, and I won't be treated like one now." Chapter 8. The Breaking Point. After a difficult 36-hour labor, Leo arrives, 7 pounds 4 ounces of perfection that Imani falls instantly in love with. 12 weeks later, when Leo has just started to smile and coo responsively, Marcus insists she attend an important industry event, where he drunkenly introduces her to business associates as "my son's convenient vessel." When they return home, his cruel words escalate. "You're nothing but another gold digger. I've given you more than you deserve." Something inside Imani snaps. "I wasn't a prostitute when you met me, and I won't be treated like one now." Chapter 8. The Breaking Point. After a difficult 36-hour labor, Leo arrives, 7 pounds 4 ounces of perfection that Imani falls instantly in love with. 12 weeks later, when Leo has just started to smile and coo responsively, Marcus insists she attend an important industry event, where he drunkenly introduces her to business associates as "my son's convenient vessel." Leo's arrival transformed Imani's world, despite the circumstances of his conception. The moment the nurse placed her son in her arms, Imani felt a fierce, protective love surge through her. His tiny fingers wrapped around hers, and in that instant, every sacrifice seemed worth it. Marcus had been present for the birth, standing at a careful distance. When the doctor announced, "It's a boy," his composure briefly cracked, revealing genuine emotion. "Perfect," he'd whispered. The birth certificate read Marcus Reed Jr., though Imani called him Leo in private moments, named for her father, a connection to the family separated from her. The first weeks passed in a blur of midnight feedings and exhaustion. Marcus hired a night nurse over Imani's objections and visited daily, his interactions with his son stiff but attentive. He would hold the baby carefully, speaking to him about the empire he would someday inherit, these one-sided conversations never acknowledging Imani's presence. By Leo's 12th week, Marcus had established a routine of morning and evening visits, bringing expensive gifts, designer clothes Leo would quickly outgrow, toys too advanced for his development, even a custom gold rattle that became a prop in photos Marcus commissioned. Then came the Bellamy Media Gala, the same annual event where Imani had first encountered Marcus over a year ago. Despite her reluctance to leave Leo, Marcus insisted on her attendance, arranging for Elise's nursing aide to watch the baby. "You're my son's mother," he said. "Your presence is expected." At the gala, Imani wore a designer gown that disguised the last vestiges of her pregnancy. To outsiders, she appeared to be living a fairy tale, the unknown model elevated by a powerful man. Reality told a different story. As the evening progressed, Marcus consumed more alcohol than Imani had ever seen, his public mask slipping with each drink. When a business associate asked about their relationship status, Marcus chuckled and gestured toward Imani. "Meet my son's convenient vessel," he announced, loud enough for neighboring groups to hear. "Beautiful, isn't she? Worth every penny of the arrangement." Gasps and uncomfortable laughter rippled through the listeners. Imani stood frozen, humiliation burning through her veins. Without a word, she turned and walked toward the exit. Marcus caught up with her at the coat check. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded, his words slurred. "Home to our son. Who deserves better than a father who speaks of his mother this way?" "Our son?" Marcus laughed coldly. "Let's be clear. He's my son. You were the convenient incubator, handsomely paid for your services." The ride back to the apartment passed in frigid silence. At home, the night nurse reported Leo was sleeping peacefully before departing. "Your behavior tonight was embarrassing," Marcus said, loosening his tie. "I introduced you to valuable connections, and you disappeared without a word." Imani stared in disbelief. "My behavior? You referred to me as a vessel. You discussed our private arrangement in public." "Don't be dramatic," Marcus scoffed, pouring himself a scotch. "Everyone at that level understands how these arrangements work. The only thing unusual is how generously I've provided for you." "Generously?" Imani's voice rose before she caught herself. "You've treated me like property since I signed your contract. You've controlled where I live, what I eat, who I see. You promised to support my modeling career, then dismissed it as a hobby." Marcus took a long sip. "I've given you financial security beyond anything you could have achieved on your own. An allowance most people would consider a fortune." His voice hardened. "You're nothing but another gold digger. I've given you more than you deserve." The words struck like physical blows. Imani felt something inside her, something that had been bending under increasing pressure for months, finally snap. "I wasn't a prostitute when you met me," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "And I won't be treated like one now." Marcus's eyes widened slightly. "Careful, Imani. Remember the terms of our agreement. Your lifestyle depends entirely on my goodwill." "Keep your money," she replied, moving toward the nursery. "I'd rather scrub floors than live another day under your control. And what about our son? The contract gives me full custody rights." Imani froze, her hand on the nursery door. "You wouldn't separate a child from his mother?" "Wouldn't I?" Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Single fathers raise children successfully all the time. With my resources, Junior would want for nothing. Except love," Imani said softly. "You don't love him, Marcus. You see him as an extension of your empire, another asset to control." Leo slept peacefully in his crib, one tiny fist curled beside his face. The sight of him steeled her resolve. "We had an agreement," she said without turning. "I fulfilled my part. I gave you your heir. But I won't sacrifice my dignity or my son's well-being to your ego." "What exactly are you saying?" Marcus asked, his voice dangerously soft. "I'm saying this arrangement is over. The controlling, the belittling, the public humiliation. It stops now. Either we renegotiate terms that recognize my value as Leo's mother and as a person with my own ambitions, or I take my chances in court." Marcus laughed. "On what grounds?" "The contract is airtight." "Is it?" Imani asked. "Does it account for your drunken public confessions? The witnesses who heard you refer to me as a vessel you purchased? The emotional abuse that's become your standard mode of interaction?" She stepped closer. "I may not have your money or your power, Marcus, but I have something you don't. the moral high ground. How do you think the public would react to the real Marcus Reed, the man who buys women to breed his heirs, then discards them when they ask to be treated with basic human respect? Chapter 9. Legal Battle. Armed with the contract and recordings of Marcus's abuse, Imani takes him to court. The media frenzy is immediate. Marcus offers increasingly large settlements, which Imani rejects. "This isn't about money anymore," she tells her lawyer. Other women step forward with similar stories, models whom Marcus had manipulated, then discarded. "You're making a terrible mistake," Marcus warned, his face flushed with anger. "No court will side with you against me. Do you know how many judges I've appointed to charity boards? How many legal firms depend on my business?" Imani stood her ground, Leo sleeping against her shoulder. "Then I'll take this beyond the courts, to the media, to social media. The court of public opinion doesn't care about your connections." The threat hung between them, a gauntlet thrown. Marcus's empire relied on his carefully cultivated public image, the self-made billionaire, the visionary entrepreneur, the philanthropist. That image wouldn't survive the revelation that he'd essentially purchased a woman to breed his heir. "What do you want?" he asked finally, calculation replacing rage in his eyes. "Joint custody of Leo, complete autonomy over my career and personal life, and you honor your promise to make introductions in the modeling industry, not as a favor, but as fulfillment of our contract." Marcus considered her demands, visibly weighing his options. "And the financial arrangements?" "Remain as agreed, with modifications to remove the controlling clauses. I don't want your money for myself, but Leo deserves his share of your legacy." For a moment, Imani thought he might agree, then his expression hardened. "My lawyers will contact you. Get out of my apartment." "Our apartment," Imani corrected. "Until legal arrangements are finalized. I'm not leaving my son's home, and I'm certainly not leaving him with you." That night, after placing Leo in his crib, Imani made two crucial calls. The first was to Diana Watts, one of New York's most formidable family law attorneys, known for representing women in high-profile custody battles. The second was to her Aunt Vera in Jamaica. "I need to speak to my mother," Imani said, tears finally breaking through her composure. "Please, Auntie, it's important." To her surprise, Elise came to the phone almost immediately. "I've been waiting for you to find your way back," her mother said, her voice warm despite the months of silence. "Vera told me you've been sending letters. I'm ready to listen now." The conversation lasted hours, Imani explaining everything: the contract, Marcus's controlling behavior, her decision to fight for her dignity and her son's future. When she finished, Elise was quiet for a long moment. "You made a choice for my life that cost you dearly," she said finally. "Now you're making one for your son that may cost just as much. But this time you're choosing the path of integrity." Her voice strengthened. "I'm proud of you, Imani. When do you need me there?" "As soon as possible," Imani replied, relief flooding through her. "I think I'm going to need all the support I can get." The legal battle began quietly, with formal letters exchanged between attorneys. Marcus's initial offer was insulting: limited visitation rights for Imani, a modest settlement contingent on her permanent silence, and relocation to a smaller apartment away from his primary residence. Diana Watts responded with their terms: joint custody, maintenance of all financial provisions from the original contract, and freedom for Imani to pursue her career without interference. She also included a flash drive containing audio recordings Imani had secretly made of Marcus's demeaning comments, including those at the Bellamy Gala. "How did you get these?" Diana asked when Imani provided the recordings. "After he called me a vessel in public, I started documenting everything," Imani explained. "I used the voice memo app on my phone. I needed evidence in case it came to this." The recordings transformed their negotiating position. Marcus's next offer was substantially improved, but still demanded Imani's silence about their arrangement. Again, she refused. "This isn't about money anymore," she told Diana. "It's about dignity. Mine and every other woman he might target in the future." 3 weeks into negotiations with no resolution in sight, Marcus made a tactical error. His fourth settlement offer reached $12 million plus a Manhattan townhouse, but still demanded complete confidentiality. When Imani refused yet again, Marcus filed for emergency custody under New York Family Court Rule 6.7b, claiming she suffered from postpartum instability and financial extortion behavior patterns that made her an unfit mother. His petition included affidavits from the private nurse and doctor, Winters, both carefully worded to suggest concern without directly stating anything defamatory. Diana immediately countered with their own filing, including the damaging recordings and a detailed account of Marcus's controlling behavior. Because of Marcus's prominence, the case wasn't sealed, and the media descended like vultures on fresh meat. New York billionaire in shocking baby-buying scandal screamed the tabloid headlines. Riyadh media mogul, accused of purchasing surrogate mother, reported the more restrained publications. Within days, the story dominated news cycles, social media, and cocktail party conversations throughout the city. Marcus's public relations team worked overtime, attempting to reframe the narrative as a misunderstanding between two adults who had a child together outside of a traditional relationship. But the recordings, particularly one where Marcus explicitly discussed purchasing Imani's reproductive services, made such spin nearly impossible. As the media frenzy intensified, something unexpected happened. Other women began to come forward with similar stories about Marcus Reed, models and aspiring actresses who claimed he had proposed arrangements to them, some involving children, others merely sexual services in exchange for career advancement. None had agreed to terms as comprehensive as Imani's, but the pattern was clear and damning. One woman, a former model named Vanessa Chen, reached out directly to Imani through Diana. "I almost took his offer 5 years ago," she confided during their meeting. "He approached me at a Fashion Week party, suggested a mutually beneficial arrangement that included having his child. I refused, and suddenly no agency in New York would touch me. I ended up leaving the industry entirely." Vanessa agreed to provide a sworn affidavit about her experience, as did 3 other women with similar stories. The mounting evidence suggested a predatory pattern spanning years, a powerful man systematically targeting vulnerable young women with promises of security and opportunity, contingent on surrendering their reproductive autonomy. Marcus's lawyers proposed increasingly generous settlements, culminating in an offer that would have made Imani wealthy beyond imagination. Each time she refused unless the settlement included public acknowledgement of his behavior and dropped all requirements for her silence. "He doesn't understand," Imani explained to her mother, who had arrived from Jamaica and now helped care for Leo while Imani navigated the legal battle. "This was never about extracting maximum payment. It's about breaking the cycle." Elise, who had initially been horrified by her daughter's arrangement with Marcus, had become her strongest advocate. "Some men believe everything has a price," she said, cradling her grandson. "They cannot comprehend a woman who values dignity above wealth." As the case moved toward trial, Marcus made one final attempt at settlement. His latest offer included everything Imani had initially demanded: joint custody, financial security, career assistance, plus a substantial trust for Leo beyond what was originally promised. The only remaining sticking point was confidentiality. "He's desperate to keep the details out of court," Diana explained during a strategy session in her office. "Once testimony begins, every sordid element becomes public record. His reputation may never recover." Imani considered the offer carefully. "If I accept confidentiality, what happens to the other women? The ones he's targeted before, or might target in the future. That's not your responsibility, Diana reminded her gently. Your primary obligation is to your son and yourself. But it is my choice, Imani replied, her decision crystallizing, and I choose transparency. Let the truth come out in court. The trial became a media sensation. Security guards had to clear paths through photographers and reporters each time Imani entered or exited the courthouse. Marcus arrived in dark SUVs with tinted windows, his expression grim as he hurried past the cameras. Inside the courtroom, Imani's legal team methodically presented their evidence. The original contract with its controlling provisions, the recordings of Marcus's demeaning comments, testimony from the women who had experienced similar propositions, expert witnesses who characterized the arrangement as reproductive coercion and exploitation of financial vulnerability. Marcus's attorneys attempted to paint Imani as a calculating gold digger who had seduced their client with the intention of extracting maximum financial benefit. The strategy backfired when cross-examination revealed Marcus had approached Imani with the proposition, not the other way around, and had prepared the contract before she ever agreed to the arrangement. 7 days into the trial, with public opinion turning decisively against him and shareholders of Reed Media expressing concerns about leadership, Marcus requested a private meeting with Imani and their respective lawyers. "You've made your point," he said, looking older and more haggard than Imani had ever seen him. "What will it take to end this circus?" Imani studied the man who had fathered her child, the man who had seen her as nothing more than a vessel for his ambitions. For the first time, she recognized fear behind his arrogance. Joint custody with primary physical custody to me. The financial provisions as originally agreed, no confidentiality clause, and a public statement acknowledging the nature of our arrangement with an apology to me and the other women you approached. Marcus blanched. "That would destroy me." "It would humble you," Imani corrected. "There's a difference." Chapter 10. Victory. The judge's ruling is unequivocal. Full custody of Leo to Imani, plus a settlement that ensures both their futures. More meaningful than the money are the calls from legitimate agencies, impressed by her poise and determination during the trial. That night, Elise calls for the first time in months. "You fought with honor," she says. "I'm coming to meet my grandson." After 22 days of testimony, the trial reached its conclusion. The courtroom was packed with journalists, their pens poised to capture Judge Hernandez's decision. Marcus sat at the defendant's table, his customary aura of invincibility replaced by the wary tension of a man facing potential ruin. Imani entered with her mother at her side, both women holding their heads high as cameras flashed around them. Leo had been left in Lucia's care to shield him from the media circus. Judge Hernandez adjusted her glasses and began. "After careful consideration of all evidence, this court has reached a decision regarding custody of the minor child, Leo Marcus Reed, and the enforceability of the contract between the parties. The contract between Imani Bailey and Marcus Reed is hereby deemed unenforceable on grounds of public policy. No court will uphold an agreement that commodifies human reproduction and establishes controlling provisions that border on indentured servitude." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Marcus's attorney leaned toward him, whispering urgently. "Regarding custody, the court grants primary physical custody to Imani Bailey, with Marcus Reed granted visitation rights under supervision for the first 6 months, to be re-evaluated thereafter based on demonstrated parental fitness. Furthermore, Mr. Reed will continue to provide financial support as outlined in the original agreement, not because the contract is valid, but because this court determines such support to be in the best interest of the child. These funds will be placed in a trust administered by a neutral third party." The judge set aside her papers and leaned forward. "Let me be clear. This court does not endorse arrangements where children are treated as assets to be acquired through financial leverage. This ruling should serve notice that wealth and power do not place anyone above ethical conduct or family law. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell with finality, and the courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the exits. Marcus was quickly surrounded by his legal team, their expressions grave as they conferred in hushed tones. Diana turned to Imani, her professional demeanor breaking into a rare smile. "Congratulations. This is as decisive a victory as we could have hoped for." Elise embraced her daughter. "You stood your ground," she whispered. "Your father would be so proud." Outside the courthouse, a sea of microphones awaited them. Diana made a brief statement while Imani and Elise slipped into a waiting car. As they pulled away, Imani caught a glimpse of Marcus emerging from the building, surrounded by security personnel. For a moment, their eyes met through the car window. There was no triumph in Imani's gaze, only quiet resolution. Marcus looked away first. The following weeks brought unexpected developments. The story of Imani's stand against one of New York's most powerful men resonated far beyond the tabloid headlines. Women's advocacy groups hailed her courage. Legal scholars debated the implications of Judge Hernandez's ruling for reproductive contracts. Most surprisingly, Imani began receiving calls from legitimate modeling agencies, not out of pity but genuine professional interest. Her composure throughout the trial had caught the attention of industry professionals. "Your poise under pressure was remarkable," said Elena Vasquez, head of a prestigious agency. "And frankly, you photographed beautifully even under those terrible circumstances. We'd like to discuss representation if you're still interested in pursuing modeling." Similar calls followed. 3 agencies within the first week after the verdict, each offering legitimate representation without predatory undertones. "It's ironic," Imani told Lucia over coffee. "I came to New York to model, ended up in this nightmare with Marcus, and now the nightmare itself has opened doors the traditional path never did." The trust established by court order provided Imani and Leo with financial security beyond anything she had imagined. She found a comfortable apartment in a family-friendly neighborhood, far from the sterile luxury of Marcus's Upper East Side building. Elise extended her visit indefinitely, delighting in her grandson's daily developments and providing the family connection Imani had ached for during their estrangement. "I was wrong to cut you off," Elise admitted one evening as they watched Leo sleep. "I judged your choice without understanding your desperation." "You taught me integrity was my power," Imani replied softly. "In the end, that's what saved me, what saved us both." 1 month after the verdict, as Imani was preparing for her first professional photo shoot, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Ms. Bailey, this is Jennifer Crane, Mr. Reed's assistant. Mr. Reed would like to arrange a time to visit his son, per the court's visitation schedule. He's completed the required parenting classes and psychological evaluation." Imani took a deep breath. Despite everything, she had never intended to keep Leo from knowing his father. "Saturday morning would work. Tell him 10 a.m. and the court-appointed supervisor will meet him here." That Saturday, precisely at 10 a.m., Marcus arrived. Gone was the imperious billionaire who had once treated her as property. In his place stood a chastened man in casual clothes, carrying a small stuffed animal and looking uncharacteristically uncertain. The supervisor, Mrs. Goldstein, greeted him at the door and explained the parameters of the visit. Imani nodded a brief acknowledgement before retreating to the kitchen, giving Marcus space with his son while remaining within earshot. To her surprise, Marcus's interaction with Leo seemed genuine. He spoke softly to the baby, his voice lacking the performative quality of their previous family moments. When Leo grasped his finger and gurgled, Marcus's face transformed with an emotion Imani had never witnessed in him before. simple, unalloyed joy. As Marcus prepared to leave, he paused at the kitchen doorway. "He's thriving," Marcus said awkwardly. "You're doing a good job with him." "Thank you," Imani replied, not quite meeting his eyes. "I've been thinking about what the judge said about dignity and autonomy. I didn't see it then, how I was treating you. I thought because I was offering financial security, I was entitled to set the terms." He paused. "I was wrong." The admission caught Imani off guard. She looked at him directly, searching his face for the manipulation she had come to expect. Instead, she found something that resembled genuine regret. "Leo deserves better from me," Marcus added. "And you deserved better too." Before Imani could respond, Mrs. Goldstein appeared to escort Marcus out. The door closed behind them, leaving Imani alone with her thoughts and the faint hope that perhaps, for Leo's sake, something good might yet emerge from all that had transpired. That evening, her phone rang again. This time it was Elena from the agency. "Imani, wonderful news. Harper's wants you for their Women of Strength issue. They've been following your story and believe you embody exactly the kind of resilience they want to feature." As she stood at the window later, looking out at the city lights, Imani reflected on the strange path that had brought her to this moment. She had come to New York seeking recognition of her beauty, only to discover that her true strength lay in something far deeper. The integrity her mother had always told her was her real power. Chapter 11. Rising Star. The Harper's photo shoot didn't happen immediately after the trial. For the first 3 months following the verdict, Imani focused entirely on Leo, rebuilding their life in a comfortable Brooklyn brownstone, purchased with the initial portion of her settlement. She declined all professional opportunities, dedicated to establishing stability for her son after the turmoil of the court battle. Only when Leo turned 18 months old, now walking, babbling in proto-sentences, and secure in his attachment to his mother, did Imani begin considering career options again. By then, the media frenzy had cooled somewhat, though her name still carried recognition value. The Harper's opportunity came through Diana Watts, whose sister worked as an editor at the magazine. "They're planning a Women of Strength issue," Diana explained over coffee. "Your story resonates with their vision." The resulting photo shoot launched Imani's career with unexpected force. The pictures, striking black and white portraits that captured both her physical beauty and unmistakable strength, appeared not only in the magazine but on billboards throughout Manhattan. The accompanying profile, titled "Integrity's Power," detailed her journey from Jamaica to courtroom victory without sensationalism or exploitation. "We've received unprecedented response to your feature," the magazine's editor informed her 2 weeks after publication. "Women across the country see themselves in your struggle and triumph." Overnight, Imani Bailey became more than a model. She became a symbol. Women stopped her on the street to express solidarity. Mothers thanked her for standing up for maternal rights. Young models approached her at industry events, seeking advice on navigating predatory situations. "I never expected this," Imani confessed to Elena, the agency director who had signed her following the Harper's piece after a particularly successful runway show for an up-and-coming designer. "I just wanted to protect my son and myself." "Sometimes personal battles become public revolutions," Elena replied. "You've tapped into something people have felt but couldn't articulate: the commodification of women's bodies and reproductive capacity." Over the next year, Imani built her portfolio carefully, selecting projects that aligned with her values and accommodated her commitment to Leo. She pioneered contract clauses that protected models' autonomy and dignity, which several major agencies eventually adopted as standard practice. Throughout this professional renaissance, Marcus fulfilled the court-mandated visitation schedule with Leo. His initial supervised visits gradually expanded to include overnight stays every other weekend at his penthouse, where he had indeed created an elaborate nursery. Imani observed these developing interactions carefully,